After having recently reread one of my 14-year-old self's least favorite books, I thought it might be fun to revisit one of my favorite books from that era. I think at the age of 14, if you had asked me what my favorite book was, I would have told you The Book Thief. But me now at 24, I have no uncertainties about how well The Book Thief holds up. I'm sure it hits the exact same now as it did then. I'm sure the quality is still there. This book, on the other hand, I'm a little bit less certain about. I think there's a pretty significant chance that I find this book corny, poorly written, and if my few and far between memories are correct, a little bit misogynistic. I think there's also a chance that I'm pleasantly surprised by it, and while the latter is probably a little bit less likely, I am still going in with an open heart as I reread Paper Towns by John Green. When I think about Paper Towns, what I remember more than anything is that I loved this book at the time. I also, of course, loved The Fault in Our Stars, which is a book I maybe will revisit. It feels a little bit more like low-hanging fruit than this one, but this won out as my favorite John Green book. There are very few things that I actually remember from the book. I think that really terrible movie that they made of it has like taken over in my brain. It's like taken up all the Paper Town spots in my brain. I remember that Margot was very quirky. I remember that she believed in random capitalization. I think she wrote in like a diary or something in a very strange secret code where she wrote forwards and backwards and up and down, and she's the only one who can decipher it. That might have been a different John Green book. What I really vividly remember is that Q and his friends play a game in the car called That Man is a Gigolo, and at the time I read this, I thought that was genuinely the funniest thing I had ever heard in my entire life, and I think that's really indicative of the taste that we're dealing with, the taste that led me to believe that this was a fantastic book. The bar is clearly extremely low. I have read up to part 1 of this book, which is 80 or so pages in, and before I get into summarizing and giving my thoughts on what I've read so far, I want to give a little disclaimer. When I am criticizing these characters, I'm not necessarily criticizing the author's intentions or his characterization. I'm just criticizing the characters because they're annoying, and I know that they're deliberately annoying. So don't think that all of this is an attack on John Green. I have some negative things to say about John Green's choices in this book, but most of what I'm complaining about is stuff that he's doing deliberately that I know he's doing deliberately, okay? You don't need to defend him. So Paper Towns opens, and I mean opens, with this one-page chapter that's just an excerpt from the book. It's actually like the very last bit of part 1. When I say opens, I genuinely mean this is the first page that it could possibly have any printing on. This is before the publication info. This is before the title page. And I kind of love that. I kind of love how he's just absolutely thrown tradition out the window to just drop this little excerpt in right at the very, very, very start. I have no idea why. I don't think it really makes sense, but it's a choice that I respect for some reason. Once the book proper begins with its real prologue, we're introduced to our 2 lead characters, both of which have terrible names. I'm sorry if your name is Quentin, but I hate that name, and I think it's a huge relief that he's mostly called Q. I'm going to refer to him as Q. I hate the name Quentin. And the manic pixie dream girl next door that he is madly in love with is named Margot Roth Spiegelman, and she's almost always referred to by all 3 names. I had completely forgot about this little quirk of her very eccentric character. Oh my god, it put me right back in this headspace of reading Paper Towns when I was 14. I was like, Margot Roth Spiegelman, no. It starts out with Q saying that everyone gets a miracle in their life, and his miracle was being lucky enough to live next door to what he describes as the most fantastically gorgeous creature that God had ever created, Margot Roth Spiegelman. Ew. Ew. I hate that. Page 2? No. But whatever. I mean, it's certainly not making me feel warmth towards him this early on in the book, despite him being this endlessly relatable, pathetic teenager in the unrequited love situation. I don't really care. I don't really care for him right from the jump. So on pages 1 and 2, I was thinking, you know what, this humor is pretty dated, but it's kind of bringing me back. I'm kind of appreciating how voicey and sarcastic this is. I was pleasantly surprised. By the end of page 2, I was already kind of feeling fed up with it. I just think that Q is an incredibly irritating character. Like I've said, he's supposed to be, but that doesn't mean that I am not annoyed with him the entire time I'm reading this book. He's very matter-of-fact, but in a way where he's trying to be funny. He's also always correcting people, but again, in a way where he's trying to be funny, and his attempts at humor are not supported by any sort of confidence, so it often comes across as quite cringy. He's very, very tropey, as is literally every character in this book. In this prologue, at the end of page 2, where I felt like I was done with his voice already, he's talking about how as a kid, he had invented this machine that would shoot colorful rocks into space in low orbit and give Earth a ring like Saturn. And he says, I still think this would be a fine idea, but it turns out that building a cannon that can shoot boulders into a low orbit is fairly complicated. There's nothing massively criminal about that. I just hate it. I think it's just indicative of the way he's always talking in this way where he wants to be liked, he wants to be seen as sarcastic and funny and intelligent. And then also at the same time, he is like earnestly, pathetically, desperately in love with his next door neighbor who he doesn't even really know, and it's the center of his entire world. And I think that those qualities clash in a way that's just like horrible, so accurate to teenagers, but not in a way that I like to read about. Though if I remember correctly, his over-romanticization of Margot is a lesson that the book is teaching, but damn, he is relentlessly annoying. When Margot and Q are 9, they're hanging out because their parents are friends and they're neighbors. They're biking around the neighborhood and they find a corpse in a park. They find a dead man. In this moment, Q steps back and Margot steps forward, showing us their responses to danger and generally to like life. He just wants to leave and forget about it and have his therapist parents talk him through his emotions, whereas she's really curious and she goes and she asks neighbors and she sleuths and finds out that he is one of their neighbors, that he ended his life after his wife started to divorce him. She tells this to Q at his window that night and he says, not everybody kills themselves because they're getting a divorce. And she says, yeah, but maybe his strings just snapped. That's meaningful. I'm telling you that for a reason. There's this line in here that I hate where he says, here's the thing. I found a dead guy. Little, adorable 9-year-old me and my even littler and more adorable playdate. Nasty. I just don't like that. That's gross to me. The prologue ends with the corniest line in the book so far. A line that I know I would have eaten the fuck up at the time. A line that would have made me dig into this book. A line that is also in huge letters on the back. That line is, Margot always loved mysteries, and in everything that came afterward, I could never stop thinking that maybe she loved mysteries so much that she became one. I can't, say it without smiling. It begs to be read in a dramatic way, and it's just too fucking corny. I just can't get through it. Awesome. Absolutely awesome. I would have loved that at 14. Terrible line. By my standards today, it was a groan, but it's also kind of endearing in a way. The real first chapter, part 1, chapter 1, is a carousel of fucking introductions. When Q goes to school, they're in their senior year of high school. Our first introduction is his best friend, Ben. Ben is a nasty little boy. Ben calls all women, including his mom, honey bunnies. Horrible. It's not like it's treated as acceptable by the narrative or by the narrator, but it's also not treated with all that much disdain. Definitely not the amount that it deserves. He's also referring to 9th graders. Again, they're in 12th grade. He's referring to them as fresh bunnies or fresh honeys. This is fucking disgusting. This is nasty. He's talking about 9th graders because he's relaying to Q his failed plot to get one of them to go to prom with him. Everyone's obsessed with prom, except Q, of course. I know that Ben is supposed to be nasty. I know that he's supposed to be way too much, but I think this is just a little bit too far, 9th grade to 12th grade, and I don't think it is nearly looked down upon enough by the narrative. I think that this should be, in my opinion, unforgivable. That is a huge gap. I actually didn't even have 9th graders in my high school, and even 10th to 12th grade felt like a huge, insurmountable gap in age. I think it's a little bit too far for me to forgive the narrator for not just staying friends with this creep, but not even commenting on this age gap. They are 14 to 15 years old. That is beyond disgusting, especially when he refers to them as some darling little 9th grade honey bunnies. Ew. Ben should be imprisoned, and I hate him. While Ben is chatting his ear off, Q is barely listening because he's trying to get a glimpse of Margot in the hallways. She's draped over her hunk of a boyfriend, Jace, and she's laughing with her best friend, Becca. When he sees her, he says, I can see her collarbone. There's nothing hornier than a virgin teenager. When I was in middle and high school, we were fighting like hard against the dress codes. Everyone was fighting against the dress codes. I'm sure you were too. We had the same arguments that everybody has, that it sexualizes the girls and it creates a culture of non-accountability with the boys and also looks down on them. This is making me think maybe the dress codes were right. Ben and Q meet up with their other friend Radar, whose quirk is that he's very obsessive and nerdy about editing what is but is not called Wikipedia. His parents also have the world's largest collection of black Santas. We know that Radar is going to prom, Ben desperately wants to go to prom, and Q has no interest. He doesn't believe in prom. He's so different. We then get introduced to school bully Chuck Parsons, who mostly leaves this group alone nowadays, but has come up to very aggressively, full of slurs, ask if Q knows what's happening with Margot and Jace, which of course he doesn't. There is a kind of funny line here. I think this did land for me. Chuck Parson did not participate in organized sports because to do so would distract him from the larger goal of his life, to one day be convicted of homicide. I've read some far more recently written books with an audience that was intended to be far more adult, with humor that I found more insufferable than the humor in this book. I Am Looking at You, Jillian by Hallie Butler. I'm Looking at You, My Murder by Katie Williams. I've noticed in this introduction carousel that every single woman that is introduced has her appearance judged and rated by Q. It's not super over, but it's definitely not subtle either. Though I will say that I was incredibly judgmental about his use of the word creature to describe Margot earlier in the book, and he does also use that to describe Ben. It's just a weird thing that he does, apparently. So Q has his very normal routine day, an identicalness that he's very comfortable with, and then he gets into bed that night. A normal night until Margot slides his window open for the first time in 9 years. She's wearing a black hoodie, she's covered in black face paint, and she says, I need your help. More specifically, I need your car. More specifically, it's actually his mom's car. This is a sore spot for him. He says, why don't I ask your little friends for help? Because he looks down on everyone that she surrounds herself with because he's an asshole and he wants to be the apple of her eye. And she says, well, my friends are really the problem that we're solving with my 11-step plan that you're going to help me with. And he says, no, I'm not going to break the law with you because I want to go to Duke. These are the stakes beyond just getting in trouble with his parents. But of course, she convinces him, even though he's not the brave one. She's the one that steps towards the dead body. He is hopelessly in love with her and will do whatever she wants. It's midnight now. They sneak out, they get into his mom's minivan, and without starting the engine or even shutting the doors until they've rolled the car down a few houses, they make their escape. I think that this is a great, very well-written, very vivid scene. I love the mental image of them in this van that's not on, the doors open, Q kicking off of the concrete so he can get the van rolling down the driveway. It's great. It's fun. Margot tells him that they're getting revenge on her now ex-boyfriend Chase and her now ex-best friend Becca, who have been cheating. They're also going to get revenge on her other best friend Lacey, who knew and didn't tell her. So step 1 of 11, they go shopping for a whole bunch of supplies, including 3 whole catfish, Vaseline, and a can of blue spray paint. They then scour the neighborhood around Becca's house looking for Jace's car because they assume that the two of them are together. They find it, it's unlocked like Margot knew it would be, and they put some sort of device that locks the steering wheel onto it. I don't know. It seems that they got this at a Publix, but also this book is set in Florida, so it's not really unbelievable to me that they found a device that locks a steering wheel at a Publix in Florida. I don't not believe that that's something that you can just get there. Step 2, Q calls Becca's parents to say, hey, you should go look in the basement. Your daughter is fucking her best friend's boyfriend right this instant. Step 3, they camp out outside Becca's window where they know Jace is probably going to escape, and they take his photo as he runs away naked. They get a photo of his genitalia. I hope that nothing happens with this. I mean, that's gross. We all know that's gross. As despicable as cheating is, nobody deserves to be violated in that way. Step 4, they sneak into Becca's room while she's upstairs getting in trouble with her parents, and they take Jace's clothes in case he comes back for them. Step 5, Margot spray paints her initials in Becca's room and also leaves a catfish in her closet. Then they head out, and in the car, Margot tells him that step 5 is apologizing to Karen, an acquaintance that was the one that told her that Becca and Jace were cheating. Margot says in a kind of like Isn't it funny how I overreacted because I was so full of emotions kind of way? She says, I kind of shot the messenger. And then she lists the horrible names that she called Karen. And then the two of them start joking about how terrible Karen's hair is. It's just very clear to me that the appearances of the men in the story have nowhere near as much importance as the appearances of literally every woman character. I don't think there's been a single physical description of any of the men, including Q, the narrator, and all of the women have been described in terms of appearance. Anyways, at this point, Q's like, it's weird. I saw you laughing with them in the hallway this morning. And Margot's like, what are you talking about? I was screaming bloody murder. This is our first really clear indication that Q has romanticized Margot to the point of nothingness, to total dehumanization. He cannot conceptualize her as someone with a private inner world. He sees her as only a beautiful achievement that he can't reach and nothing more. Near this time, he says something about how it's unfair that someone like Jace would have sex with both Margot and Becca, while someone like him doesn't get either of them. Like, okay, ew. At this point, he also describes Becca as she may be hot, but she's also aggressively vapid and an absolute unadulterated raging bitch. I don't know, like, whatever. Sure, the popular girl is mean and she's self-obsessed and you're so much better than her. I just think when John Green says that this book is about looking at people with complexity, I wonder if the popular girls are going to be given that same treatment or if it's only the women in this story that Q wants to have sex with. Step 7 is leaving a dead fish in Jace's house. He lives in a massive McMansion with really good security, so it's very quick in and out. She breaks a window, throws it in, spray paints her initials, and they get out of there. Step 8, is that what we're at? Is now leaving a fish in Lacey's car smashed under her seat. This is both because she didn't tell Margot about the cheating and because she's generally a bad friend who is always trying to undermine Margot. At this point, when she's trying to explain what was so wrong with Lacey, she asks Q, do you think I'm fat? And he says, Jesus, no, you're... And I stop myself from saying, not skinny, but that's the whole point of you. The point of you is that you don't look like a boy. I don't know. Ew. I'm tired of hearing Q's opinions on women's bodies in this story. I think we all know that the intended audience for this book is young women, and I'm sure they didn't really appreciate this. And I do sometimes feel like this book wants its audience to feel a little bit of tenderness towards the weird boys that have crushes on them. The kids who take any opportunity to say shit like, not as pretty as you, or who defy the gentle letdowns that the women that they like are forced to give them again and again and again. The boys who keep pushing and pushing with this endless, exhausting persistence. I don't think they're treated necessarily with entirely a kind lens, but I also think that we're supposed to see the whole of them in a way that I don't necessarily love. I don't necessarily love what this book is saying to its audience about that kind of boy. But I'll counter that with a positive. This chapter dealing out Lacey's punishment ends with the line, it's 2:49 a.m. and I've never felt less tired in my entire life. And I think this book is capturing, like, isn't this the dream? It's capturing the dream. When you're a silly, pathetic little teenager with a crush that is so big and feelings that are so unmanageable that her shoulder brushing your arm means that you can no longer breathe for like the next 20 minutes. Isn't that what we all wanted? I think John Green does know what his audience yearns for, and I think he writes it well enough that it can fuel your daydreams. You can put yourself into this situation. It's working for me. Or at the very least, I understand why it worked for 14-year-old me. Step 9, they go to the top of a tall building that Margot knows the security guard of. This is mostly just so they can have their little cinematic moment and Margot can have her monologue that gives us the name of the book, where she says everything's so fake, we live in paper towns with paper people. She also uses this opportunity to say that her final string has snapped, if you remember what I'm referencing. The more the two of them hang out, the more we see that a large part of their dynamic is Q correcting Margot's grammar so that he can feel better about himself. And I know it's meant to be annoying, but oh my god, I just hate this kid more and more the more I read. I also think that Margot is a little bit irritating. She thinks that she's so different. She shits on everything everyone else values. While I don't feel it right now, I do think that 14-year-old me felt a lot of warmth towards these characters despite their annoying quirks. Step 10 is Q's turn to choose someone to enact revenge upon with a punishment that Margot has already chosen, and at her insistence, he chooses Chuck Parsons. They break into his house and use hair removal cream to get rid of just one of his eyebrows, a punishment that Margot loves because she loves to think about him choosing whether or not to draw it on or shave off the other one. Part 11 is that they break into SeaWorld, the only theme park in the state that Margot has not yet broken into. And of course, Q tries to draw a hard line in the sand here, but of course, he's not going to be able to do that, which means that their arguments do get a little bit meaningless and repetitive. Obviously, she convinces him, and they manage to break into SeaWorld. She does say, of course we're gonna get caught in here, but don't worry, I'll talk our way out of it. And when they're caught by a security guard who's kind of a perv, but perving on Margot in the same way that Q just was, her shirt's wet because to get in they had to cross a moat, and they both look at her in the same way, but he's the perv for it. He bribes them into paying for his silence, and then he fucks off, and they stay for a little bit longer, and they have a dance, which is a callback to a story from when they were in the 6th grade, whatever. And that's it. They leave SeaWorld and they go home, and this is where we get that page that was repeated at the start. Margot says, I'll miss hanging out with you. Q says, we can still hang out. And Margot says, I'm afraid it's not possible. And part 1 ends. So far, this is not nearly as bad as I was anticipating. I do think that there's a reason that John Green got popular. I think that he is, in a lot of ways, a talented YA writer, and I think that his writing is quite charming. I think he does a pretty good job of capturing what it feels like to be a teenager. More specifically, I think he's able to write 18-year-olds for a 13 to 15-year-old audience. It's this weird balance that he strikes where the 18-year-olds don't feel entirely unrealistic, but they do feel like something that you would want to read about from the perspective of a younger teenager. A teenager who, like when you're 13 to 15, you think that the coolest thing in the world is to be 18. And he caters to that audience without betraying the real age of his characters. Is there a ton of depth or nuance? Of course there's not. Are there some questionable choices? Absolutely there are. Do I think some of it gets wrapped up in the end, if I remember correctly? I do. And I have high hopes, not for a lot of depth or nuance, but I have high hopes that this book is saying something. It does have a message. I think it's a pretty simplistic message, but not a negative one. Nothing like the fucking Midnight Library's message. I do not like these characters, and I don't really care about them at all, but this book is written in such an easy, light way. It's so plot heavy that it's very easy to pick up and just read it. I understand why I loved this at the time, though I don't think I loved it for the right reasons. I don't think that I thought these characters were annoying, and I'm pretty sure that I was disappointed that they didn't end up together. Like, I literally was just completely blind to everything John Green was saying in this book, and that is embarrassing, reading it now and seeing the very clear messaging that's here. But so far, this is fun enough. It's definitely a blast from the past, and I am somewhat enjoying reading it and being annoyed by these annoying characters. I'm going to read more and then update you at one point. I'll see you then. All right, another 100 pages in, and this has become a lot less interesting to me. It is a lot slower than part 1, but there still is somehow so much for me to recap for you, so let's just get into it. So after his night of adventuring, Q makes it home that night, just in time to get half an hour of sleep before he has to wake up for school the next morning. He considers faking sick, but he has a perfect attendance record, and more importantly, he wants to see how Margot is going to treat him at school the next day, and I think this is incredibly real. That would be the pull. That would be able to pull you through mind-numbing exhaustion. Of course, that makes total sense to me. However, unfortunately, when Q gets to school, Margot isn't there. This has been more than foreshadowed. It's basically been explicitly said. But at school, he does have the opportunity to dish with his best friends Ben and Radar about the elusive, alluring, unreachable Margot Roth Spiegelman. Not only do they know him as being obsessed with her, Margot has a reputation that precedes her. She's known as wild and full of life, as a risk taker, as a girl that often runs away, goes missing for a while, and comes back full of stories. She's almost a mythical creature. Outrageous rumors about her escapades follow her wherever she goes. She's also popular and beautiful. Everyone knows who she is and wants to be close to her because she is like the quintessential cool girl. She's confident, she's sure of herself, she seemingly doesn't care what other people think about her, but she's still pushing the bar and taking risks and doing cool things, seemingly just for her own satisfaction. But mainly, Ben and Radar are concerned with Margot's appearance because that is the most important quality for the boys in the story. what women look like. They start going on and on about how they need a photorealistic rendering, or even better, a sculpture, because the one and only thing they're thinking about is whether or not the two of them did it, and if so, what her body looked like. I don't know. I understand that the stereotype of the sex-obsessed teenage boy has its roots in some sort of adjacent reality, but I'm tired of it in this book. And I don't think it's a choice that needed to be made this many times for these characters. I think I already said that the intended audience for this book is young girls, and whether they identify with the misunderstood cool girl who has the one guy who's intent on really seeing her for who she is, or if they identify with the loser with a pathetic, desperate crush, I think that this is alienating them from him and his friends. Sure, some teenage boys can be like this. I'd like to think that most of them aren't, but I don't think that this repeated character choice is centering the audience and the wants of the audience in a way that is the strongest quality, I think, of John Green's work in the rest of the book. And if it's trying to contrast Ben's hypersexuality with the way Q feels or talks about women, I don't think it's succeeding at that. I think that externally, Ben is a lot grosser in the way that he speaks about women, and Q holds back, but being inside his head, you know that he does not respect women to the same degree that Ben does not respect women. He just thinks he's better than Ben, which is almost worse. When Margot's car doesn't come home that night, Q starts getting jealous that she's gone on another adventure without him. Even after a couple of days of her gone, no one's really concerned because, like I said, Margot runs away all the time. Everyone is a little bit on edge, and things are different. The dynamics are different at school without Margot to keep the shitty popular kids in check. Chuck and his friends run over like 12 of the freshmen's bikes in one of their trucks. Some of them bring water guns full of piss to school, so Q does what he thinks Margot would want him to do, in that it's a confident thing to do, and she told him he was cuter when he was confident, and in that it involves blackmailing Jace with the photo of his small penis. Q emails Jace and he says, you need to pay back those freshmen for their bikes, you need to tell your friends to apologize, and that they need to behave better. Jace emails back and says, I know this is you, Quentin, but he still follows his orders, even bringing Chuck to his house with his tail between his legs to apologize. I don't love this blackmail, but I think it's a lot better than what could have happened with this photo, and what could have been portrayed in like a really cool, badass kind of way like this email is. It was, I think, the best thing that could have happened. That Saturday, Q wakes up and he goes downstairs to find his parents, Margot's parents, and a detective all sitting around his dining room table. They've come over because they want to ask him about seeing her that Wednesday night before she disappeared. Margot's parents are fed up and they're frustrated. This is the 5th time that they've reported their daughter missing. They're angry. They want her to see some consequences. They want her to stop acting in such a selfish way. When she leaves, it almost seems like she's taunting them. She's leaving these clues that don't really lead anywhere, and they're tired of it. And they also have an 11-year-old daughter that they need to take care of as well. When Margot's mom says she needs to see consequences, Q's therapist mom says, well, she needs to see loving consequences. And then Margot's mom says, you're not the one who's been walked all over for the last 10 years by a daughter who continues to make the most self-centered choices she can make. Now, it's true that Margot's parents are angry and they're acting out of emotion and not necessarily making great parenting choices when they say that she's an adult now and they're going to change the locks. But they are treated by literally everyone, Q, which is to be expected because he's obsessed with Margot, but also the detective and Q's parents, who are their friends. Everyone treats Margot's parents like they're totally unreasonable and terrible people. And not just in action, but also in their emotions about how Margot has treated them. I understand that Q doesn't see how selfish Margot can be. I know it's part of his arc. I know that he's got these rose-colored glasses on because he's obsessed with her and he thinks he's in love with her. But for everyone else to act like these parents are totally unreasonable is insane to me. Of course they would be fed up, right? I also think that there's a sadness in the way that they're talking about this. There's a desire to see her make the right choices, but also a reluctant acceptance that she's not going to. I just hated that. I hated how the narrative treated these parents. There was no nuance, no complexity to it, because this book loves Margot Roth Spiegelman. Anyway, the detective wants to talk to Q privately, and I think because he says that unfortunately being a detective means that he has to work with people like the Spiegelmans and that they're really terrible parents, Q just trusts him implicitly and tells him about their nighttime adventure. The detective ends up going on this insanely long, nonsensical monologue about how runaway kids are like balloons. I'm starting to notice that everybody in this book kind of talks in monologues. I think that's pretty common for books that have very one-note characters. What is difficult, and particularly difficult, about this little balloon speech that the detective goes on is that it feels like John Green thinks that he's saying something really profound, and it's just nothing. Like, he's literally not even making any points, but he's like in love with himself when he's talking about runaway kids are balloons in the sky, and to you there's just one balloon in the sky, but I see all these kids, the sky's so full of balloons you can't even see the blue anymore. What does that even mean? Oh, it's so stupid. All of the monologues that all of the characters go on are filled with these really terrible analogies, and it just makes me think, John Green, you're not that guy. You're not that guy, pal. The Spiegelmans and the detective leave because he wants to go and comb through Margot's room one more time. Later in the day, Ben and Radar are over, and Q looks outside his window and he sees that Margot's blind has been pulled down. But he's not looking at her blind, he's looking at a poster that's been taped to the backside of it, of Woody Guthrie holding a guitar with a sticker that says, "This machine kills fascists." This reminds me of the fact that John Green, at least at one point, had a sticker that said, "This machine kills fascists" on his laptop, and someone once said he literally just uses that thing to write about kids who have cancer fucking. So they wait around for the Spiegelmans to leave. They leave their 11-year-old daughter Ruthie home alone. Ruthie talks like she's 4, which is a pet peeve of mine. I hate when authors can't write children's voices correctly. Like, just don't put a kid in if you can't do it. She basically answers the door with her thumb in her mouth. Like, she genuinely is like a 4-year-old, which I think, even though it's something that really bothers me, I think it would stand out to someone who doesn't care as much because she has been left home alone. For a $5 charge, she lets them inside to go dig around in Margot's room. They are in this room forever. The first thing that Q notices is that her closet is absolutely packed full of clothes and she has dozens and dozens of shoes. And I just don't buy this with Margot's character being so preoccupied. Like, her entire worldview is attached to this idea of fakeness. I think John Green just thinks women be shopping. So they end up finding a series of extremely convoluted clues. They look through her huge bookshelf full of records that no one knew she had. No one knew she was into music. Another one of these hints that Margot is more than the romanticization of her. In here, they find an album that's not a Woody Guthrie album, but does have that same poster on the cover of it. They find in the list of songs a title circled that says Walt Whitman's Niece. They look in her books, they find Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. It has some highlighted lines in it. They take that and they go. A lot of the lines are highlighted in blue, but there are just 2 lines highlighted in green. They say, "Unscrew the locks from the doors, unscrew the doors themselves from their jambs." So they come back a different day to unscrew her doorknob and her door hinges, but they don't find the note that they're expecting to find. Q is very excited, though, that it seems like this time Margot wants to be found, and specifically she wants to be found by him. He says, "Maybe untold riches awaited he who found her." Ew. Ugh. So after the snooping around in Margot's room, it kicks into a really boring section of the book that is mostly just Q reading Leaves of Grass, specifically Song of Myself by Walt Whitman, and speculating and thinking about where Margot could have gone, obsessing over finding hidden meaning in these lines. Some stuff does happen because stuff is always fucking happening in this book. Lacey Pemberton, Margot's ex-best friend, who she hates now because she didn't tell her about the cheating going on between Becca and Jace, comes up to Ben and Q in the hallway. She says, "I know that you were with Margot that night. Why was she upset with me?" When she comes up to them, she's described like this: denim miniskirt, tight white shirt, scooped neck, extraordinarily olive skin, legs that make you care about legs. Lacey Pemberton walking toward us. Ew, I hate that. I hate this. I hate the way Lacey is treated by the story. I hate that Q hates her, looks down on everyone that Margot hangs out with, and then is like, "Oh my god, but she's beautiful. Oh my god, she's talking to me. Oh, I need to play it cool now. She's so hot." Ugh, horrible. I hate this little boy. Lacey tells them that she actually didn't even know that Becca and Jace were cheating, but her boyfriend did, and when she found out that he did and didn't tell her, she broke up with him, and now she doesn't even have a date to the prom. Q really quickly dips out of this conversation. He wants to give Ben a chance, though there is no shot to ask Lacey to prom. Somehow this succeeds, like as if he's been described as short, annoying, and a sexist pig. So why Lacey Pemberton, like coolest girl in school, really hot, would allow him to be her prom date, I don't know. But now that Ben has a date to prom, it really is true that all anyone can talk about is prom. I mean, it's in a few days. This irritates Q endlessly because he doesn't actually care about his friends, and they are no longer indulging him talking about his obsession over Margot Roth Spiegelman. So he's obsessing on his own, and finally one day he has a light bulb moment where he realizes that the door jambs and the door hinges that she was talking about when she highlighted that note in the Walt Whitman poem are his. He unscrews his bedroom door, and there he finds a little slip of paper that has been torn off of a newspaper. He can see printed on it is the date that she disappeared, and handwritten in Margot's handwriting is an address of a mini mall like half an hour away. He calls up his friends who agree to skip school the next day, pretend they're sick, and take him out to that mini mall. Now, this scene when they get there, I think is one of the most impactful and memorable scenes in this story. I've read this book, and I'm also 24, so it did not hit the same way now, but it did make me remember how I felt reading it back then. It's such a sudden shift in tone that it's like stomach-droppingly anxiety-inducing. They get to this abandoned mini-mall, and though it has probably been about 30 pages, it feels like it has been much longer of speculating and obsessing and trying to figure out what hints mean, so this is very exciting to have something new, some new trail to follow, until they get there and they see how desolate and run down it is, and Q has the thought for the first time that this is not somewhere he's going to find Margot alive. And they're all having this thought, and then they get out of the car and they're hit by a suffocating wave of the unmistakable smell of death. And while this did nothing for me the second time, I vividly remembered what it did for me the first time. They go from excited to silently full of dread in an instant. They go around the back of the mini mall, and they're so relieved to find a disgusting, decaying, bloated, dead raccoon back there. They break in, and they don't find much. This is covered in dust. It was abandoned decades before. It seems like there are almost no signs of life in here until, right when they're about to leave, they find a wall that's been recently painted over. This is like terrifying to think, oh my god, someone actually has been in here recently. It's very dark. They're hearing scurrying. Like, it's not a nice place to be. They're freaked out by this sign of life, but before they go, Radar drops his flashlight, and this indirect lighting kind of makes a message that has been painted over appear on that wall. It says, "You will go to the paper towns and you will never come back," clearly in Margot's hand. Q gets home and calls the detective and tells him about what he's found, and he says, "I'm worried that she might have killed herself," and the detective starts talking about balloons again and says, "Don't worry, she'll be home soon, I'm sure of it." Entirely unhelpful, so Q starts Googling the phrase paper towns. He manages like 40 entries into Google to find some post from a woman on a real estate forum in Kansas saying that the subdivision she was going to move into never ended up actually being fully developed because they didn't get the funding. I don't know if we're supposed to think that this post is from Margot. It does say that the woman's name is Marge, but also it's a real estate forum in Kansas. For some reason, Q has drawn this very unclear line between this and Margot's thing about paper towns, thinking a paper town is what he calls a pseudo-vision, which is a subdivision that has been partway developed but never actually built, which are sprinkled over Orlando. I would like to say that I think this is just Q being really unreasonable because of his now overwhelming anxiety about Margot's well-being. He's really afraid that she has left him to be the one to find her body because it won't mess him up like it would other people because the two of them have already found a body together. He's worried that she's going to mirror that body that they found by dying in a subdivision, and then he finds her. It makes no sense. I don't know if it's supposed to. It's stupid, though. So he borrows Ben's car and he starts driving around the unfinished subdivisions in the area, and it's while he's doing this that he has his first, like, emo moment where the anxiety and this pending grief finally bubble up, and he freaks out a little bit. On prom night, he borrows Ben's car again, and he goes back to search the mini mall a little bit more on his own. He's walking through this abandoned office, and all of the calendars are abandoned on the same page, which is, like, November 1986 or something like that, and he walks by and he sees that one of them is actually June 1986, and so he digs through the drawers, and in there he finds Margot's red nail polish that she had on the night of their nighttime adventure. He's like, well, this could be from like a different time, maybe it's not the same bottle, but he sees there's a little bit of blue spray paint on it, that spray paint they were using to vandalize, and he immediately resolves to stay here for the night in case Margot decides to come back to this building, this rat-infested building that he's in. But he says, in the end, the rats didn't matter, not really, because I was in a place where Margot had been alive. This is the moment that I really realized why I liked this book so much as a 14-year-old, and that's because as a 14-year-old, I was so fucking suicidal. I absolutely devoured anything that had themes of death and killing yourself when I was 14. I know I would have loved that line about being in a place where Margot had been alive. While I will admit, unfortunately, I would have identified more with Q than I would have with Margot. I think that I would have been so obsessed with death and disappearing and someone who cared enough to look for you. Y'all know how it is when you're that age. Puberty, everything feels so big and insurmountable. And you feel like a fucking freak if you're depressed at 14 and you want to die. At least in 2014, I felt like a freak. And seeing it represented in a book, oh, I totally know why this was one of my favorites. It's that. It's the suicide. So Q sits alone in this building for hours just thinking. And finally, at one point, he says he didn't really know Margot at all. And I think you're supposed to be irritated with him saying things are like or unlike Margot throughout the book because he didn't know her. He does kind of ruin it in this moment by being like, I only knew the version of herself that she showed to me. But it's like the whole thing is like she didn't actually show a version of herself to you. Like you didn't actually really know her. You were friends when you were 9. Then you were obsessed with her for 9 years. Then you had one night of adventure. Who are you to say what Margot is and isn't like? Or to say that she has a version of herself that she shows you? You don't know her. Whatever. I think the message is that people contain multitudes, and I think Q is going on an arc where he realizes that he doesn't know her and that he just created a Margot for himself. But I'm still annoyed with him nonetheless. After a while, he looks around a little bit more and he finds a whole bunch of travel guides that have all been published after this building was abandoned in 1986. Some of them have dog-eared pages. He thinks that this might be his next clue. At 3 a.m., he's still in this building, and Ben calls him absolutely shit-faced at the Popular Kids post-prom party, saying, we need a designated driver. Can you come over here? Q relents, and he shows up to Becca's house that is full of drunk teenagers having their we're graduating moment, and Q thinks, this is all bullshit. I'm so different from everybody else, and if Margot were here, she would be different from everybody else too, and we'd be different together. Weirdly, he goes and seeks out Becca's room, where he sees that Becca and Jace are having sex, and he stands outside the door, hoping to see her naked body. This woman that he has basically called the C word throughout this entire book. Not actually, but I think if John Green thought he could get away with it, I do think that that is how Q would describe her. He thinks that she is like a disgusting, horrible, vain, vapid bitch, and he has been saying that at length throughout the book. And now he's like, boys like me don't often get a chance to see girls like Becca naked. It's disgusting. It's nasty. I hate this. Conveniently, while he's standing there, he overhears Jace call Becca Margot's name, and once they start fighting, he disappears off to the bathroom, where he finds Lacey in the bathtub. She's drunk and she's upset. She's kind of moping about this fight that happened earlier in the night with Becca, where she announced to the whole party that Lacey had an STD. He does say, oh my god, it must be said that Lacey Pemberton was very beautiful. Well, you have been saying that. You've been saying that a lot. You have been giving your value judgment on every single woman's appearance throughout the entirety of this book, and it's been treated like that's just a chill thing to do for the whole time. So you don't need to say it again. Thank you, though. Thank you. He says she's wearing these cute little flip-flops. Ew. Ew. I really need Q to be a character who's so obsessed with Margot that he doesn't even notice other women. That's not what we're getting. Lacey drunkenly tells Q that she actually really likes Ben, even though he's a tryhard. What's wrong with trying really hard? Q takes both of them home, and then he gets into bed and he goes to sleep. The next morning, he calls Ben at like noon. Keep in mind, Ben was beyond drunk the night before. Ben says, I feel like shit. I'm not coming over to talk to you about Margot fucking Roth-Spiegelman. Q is absolutely enraged that Ben is not there at his beck and call to do his bidding, obsessing over Margot with him. Part of this, he says, is because Ben just called him for a ride the night before, and he did what his friend needed. But Radar had made it very clear that night that Ben just called him asking for a designated driver because he wanted Q to be there, because he was having fun and he wanted his friend with him. As much as I hate Ben, and I hate Ben, I think that Q's hypocrisy with this is even more frustrating. It's almost overshadowing it. He will not entertain anyone else's conversations about literally anything else. And then the moment that they say no to him, these friends who have been so generous to him, talking about Margot Roth-Spiegelman all day, every fucking day, he is so upset that he tries to end their friendship. It's so frustrating. Like, I just hate him more and more as the book goes on, and I know that's not the experience I had the first time I read this. I also know that he's supposed to be an annoying character. Later on, near where I've left off, Q has a conversation with his parents where his mom really plainly delivers us the message of the book. She says, On some fundamental level, we find it difficult to understand that other people are human beings in the same way that we are. We idealize them as gods or dismiss them as animals. Now, this is fine, whatever, I don't care. I mean, that's a hard message to really convey when your main character is as flat as he sees everyone else as, but I digress. What I've been thinking is that Q's therapist parents are so annoying. I wonder if John Green, reading this back now in 2025, would be embarrassed about the way that he wrote them. It's very clearly his ideas about what therapy or therapists were like in a time when people didn't really go to therapy as often. It's clear that in 2008, 2007, whenever, John Green was not one of the people who was going to therapy back then. It's also clear that he did not do any research. I mean, his laptop, it's killing fascists. It doesn't have time to open up a psych textbook. So his parents are always being really corny, and they're like giving these theories about human behavior and diagnosing everyone, and it's just really lame and it's really annoying and I hate it. Like at one point his dad is telling his mom about a dream that he had, and she says, "It's a metaphor for adolescence." Shut up. Shut the fuck up. Anyway, this last bit that I've read up to, page 200, the chapter ends with Q realizing that Margot is not a miracle or an adventure. She's just a girl. So I'm going to go spend the rest of the day reading the last 105 pages of this book. I am not loving it anymore. I'm kind of hating it, but I do want to see where it goes with the messaging, because that's not something I remember. Probably not something I even picked up on at 14. I was dumb as hell. I'll talk to you later when I know what has happened. I'll see you then. Bye. Okay, we've had a little bit of an incident where the cat jumped on my laptop and I picked him up off of my laptop and then he peed on me a little bit. So that was really nice. Sorry. Hello, I'm here a little bit later than I wanted to talk to you about the last third of Paper Towns. The sun is going to set as I talk to you and the lighting's going to get really bad. There's nothing I can do. I waited too long to do this. Q and Radar and Ben take Lacey to the mini mall so that they can do a little bit more digging around. Lacey's kind of becoming part of their friend group as Ben's girlfriend, but also definitely very much just Ben's girlfriend. Quite outside of it, we know how this book treats women. This time they get in there and there's people inside and everybody starts freaking the fuck out until they realize that one of these people is Gus, the security guard who worked at that building that Margot and Q broke into. Gus was Margot's friend and Lacey knows him as well. She also knows the two people that he's with. He explains to them that they're urban explorers and that Margot used to explore with them. She was really good at getting into places, but then once she was inside, she just wanted to like sit there and write in her little black notebook. And Lacey's like, "Oh my god, I remember that little black notebook." And they think, fuck, if only we had that notebook, I'm sure everything would be solved. Q is getting increasingly frustrated in his hunt for Margot. Everybody has slightly different theories. Lacey thinks that she's in New York. Ben thinks she's somewhere on an adventure and she's going to show up on the day of their graduation. But everyone is starting to care a little bit less. They do have things going on in their lives. They are graduating imminently. They have some of these, like, we're graduating moments, like, oh my god, freedom is coming. Oh my god, we're gonna miss each other. Q is pretty detached from it all, though. One day he gets home from driving around unfinished suburbs, and he's angry, and he rips this Margot hunting map off of the wall, and he looks back at it, and he notices these pinholes in the wall where he had plotted these points, and he thinks to the mini-mall, where there's a wall that had pinholes in it that look exactly like this, that they thought she had used to like hang up posters or postcards. He realizes she was plotting points on a map just like I was. And one of these maps is covered in holes and it matches up perfectly, but it doesn't really give them new information. This is a map of the entire United States and these holes in it are pointing to like pretty nondescript places. Like it's a pretty large area. Even the most rural points, you couldn't go to them and reasonably find one person. So it's at this point that John Green starts really stretching the Leaves of Grass connection or philosophy. Q starts thinking that in order to find Margot, he has to become her in the way that Walt Whitman becomes the people and the things that he listens to in the poem Song of Myself. Q becomes Margot on the last day of school when he's clearing out his locker, and all of a sudden he just can't take it anymore and he decides he doesn't want any of this shit. He throws it away and he leaves, and he realizes that leaving feels really good, and it clicks for him that Margot is not in Orlando, she's not in Florida, she has left. She's somewhere far away. On graduation day, his parents come into his room and they gift him his own car. Though it is a minivan, which is a blow, he's still happy to have something that he can drive whenever he wants, even when his mom's going to work. Before heading off for the ceremony, he is still obsessively trying to find some clue as to where Margot is. He uses this program that Radar has created that can give you like the first sentence of every Wikipedia page on a selected topic. So he looks up all of the places near one of the pinholes in this map, and he finds a town that is described in the first sentence of its Wikipedia article as a paper town. This is annoying because he's already extensively searched both Wikipedia and the internet for the term paper town, but whatever. This town is Agloe, New York, a town that some cartographers just made up to prevent their maps from getting plagiarized, which seems to be somewhat of an older common practice. So it wasn't a real town, but then someone built Agloe General Store on the point of the map that the town was, and it became a town, and now there's a Wikipedia article for it that says population 0. Except someone has left a comment in the edits that says, in Margot's random capitalization quirk, up until May 29th, this place will have a population of 1, and he knows he has found her. May 29th is the following day. Agloe is fully in New York. He's in Florida. So Q jumps into action. He starts rallying his friends who are literally in line to walk the stage for graduation, but for some reason they ditch it for him, and for some reason their parents all let them go. This is where part 3 begins. The road trip. They're on an insane time crunch. They want to get there before Margot leaves. It's a 23-hour drive, and they are dramatic teenagers, so of course they're like, we can't lose literally 1 second of this 23-hour drive that we've just ditched our graduation to take. It's kind of like this goofy moment of freedom right after the end of high school. They're doing something with purpose, and they're doing it together with friends who are all going to go their separate ways once the fall comes. That doesn't seem to be something that Q literally ever thinks about. He only thinks about being away from Margot. And not only have they just finished their schooling, they're also coming to the end of this month-long mystery that has been so taxing on them. So there is a joy and an excitement in the car for a while. Then the reality of it being a 23-hour road trip that no one has prepared for does set in. This road trip is exactly what 15-year-olds would want to do at the age of 18. They would want to feel these really seemingly high stakes. They would want to do this elaborate planning of gas station trips where they just buy tons and tons of junk food. They would want to sleep in shifts while their friends drive, and they would want to go very far away from their hometown with their best friends beside them and their parents somehow giving the okay. It's great. John Green knows what teenagers want. It is very repetitive, but I didn't feel that at the time of reading it. Here we do get to one of the few things that I remembered about this book, which is the road trip game that they create called That Man is a Gigolo. I still don't know why I thought that was so funny. It doesn't humor me at all now, especially because as soon as they introduce it, they immediately racially profile a Hispanic woman in the car next to them. At one point, Q wakes up Lacey for her driving shift, and he describes her as talking in a cute little girl voice. No matter how you emphasize that, cute little girl voice or cute little girl voice, I still think it's nasty. I feel like he's just like such a gross boy about things, and in a way that just reduces both the men and the women in the story. It seems that he's kind of unable to look at Lacey without looking through the lens of his own horniness, and he's also not seemingly able to reflect on that. Breaking up the monotony of this road trip, they almost get into a fatal car accident by hitting some cows on the highway, but then at the last second, Ben crashes the car into a ditch, and everything turns up okay. And then they make it to Agloe, and they cruise around for a while looking for this abandoned general store until they see Margot's car parked out front of it. They run inside, and she's just in there, casually writing in this little black notebook. She looks up at them without a hint of surprise on her face, and she says, "Can you just give me 5 more minutes?" And then she continues to write. When she stops writing, she comes over to talk to them, and she calls Ben this mean nickname, and Lacey defends him, and she realizes that the two of them are together, and she starts making fun of Lacey for this. They fight. It's a short fight, but a very big fight, and Lacey and Ben and Radar all leave, but of course, Q is not going to leave with his friends. He's going to stay here with Margot. Then he and Margot fight a little. They're both kind of just unreasonable people at their cores. Margot says, "Why the fuck did you come here without any warning?" He says, "How could I have possibly warned you? You disappeared off the face of the planet. I wanted to find you. I needed to know if you were okay. And she was like, that's bullshit. You didn't care if I was okay. You wanted to come save me from myself. You wanted to be my knight in shining armor, and you wanted me to tear off my clothes when you found me. She's like, by the way, how did you even find me? And he says, what are you talking about? I thought you wanted us to find you. And she says, absolutely never in a million years did I want you to find me. And he says, why did you leave us those clues then? She says, to explain why I left those clues, I gotta go way back. She picks up her little black notebook and she tells him that when she was 10 years old, she started writing a detective story that featured her as the lead 10-year-old detective, her dog who had magical powers and could talk, and Quentin, who was him exactly, except he was fearless and heroic, which is kind of just a dig that she throws into this story. She finished writing the story, and then a few years later, she decided to run away for the first time, and she picked that notebook back up to plan her escape in it. She writes crosshatch, which, if you remember, is one of the things that I remembered, so when she's writing her plan, she's also kind of rereading what she originally wrote horizontally in the notebook. I think I remember her writing crosshatch because I probably tried it afterwards and then couldn't decipher shit. I don't even know if that's a real thing. So this becomes her planning notebook, and whenever she's planning her next runaway trip or her next series of pranks, she's rereading these pages, and it's reminding her that she had this crush on Quentin. So he's always kind of like kicking around in the back of her mind. She knows that she wants to do one last series of pranks before she finally leaves her stupid little hometown, and she knows that she wants to do it with Q. As her last big gesture before ditching everyone, she wants to change him. She wants to take him on this adventure that will make him fearless, that will liberate him and turn him into the Q of her story. Then she found out about the cheating and she decides, I can't wait until graduation. I just need to leave now. I'm so done with this. I have no idea who she was originally planning on pranking, and I don't think John Green does either. I don't think he even considered that. He said that she had a plan before she knew about the cheating. Whatever. And so she showed up at his window that night, and his willingness and his bravery throughout his anxiety really surprised her, because not only had Q been seeing her as one-dimensional, she had been seeing him as a paper boy. And she realized that night that she really likes him, but she can't stay. She has to go. So she decides to leave him clues to the mini mall because she liked hanging out in there and she thinks it will make him less of a scaredy cat. It's flimsy. It's really flimsy. She says that she left him the hints and she just left, and she's been living in this abandoned building ever since, and she will never go home. She tells him that when she talked about the paper towns, she was really talking about herself as a paper girl, that she is an idea that everyone loves, but she's not tangible. She's losing her sense of self. Even though it's nice to be an idea that everyone loves, she can't really play the part anymore. So she came to Aglow, a place where a paper town became real, so that she, a paper girl, could become real. It is so corny. He tells her that he did spend a lot of time in that mini mall trying to feel closer to her, and he got less scared of the rats. He also says here that the blanket in there still smelled like her, which feels like an inside thought, Q. That feels like something you keep in there. The two of them hang out for the night. They kiss a few times, but they both know that this is not going to go anywhere because they both know that Margot is never coming back. I kind of hate this ending, like not really passionately, but to some degree. Obviously, thank God that they didn't end up together. Thank God that Q didn't run away from his life with Margot. He got some sense of closure, and so did the reader, but I feel like it's kind of annoying that she ended up liking him back and kissing him. I think that Margot could have been two different things throughout her disappearance. She could have been a girl who had run away and made a selfish choice and wasn't coming back. Or she could have been a girl who ran away wanting to be found by Q because she liked him. And it played both sides with that. It did both things and it weakened them both. Like, really? She liked him back? They're kissing now? Whatever. I was so over it. I feel like John Green was afraid to make a strong character choice at the end here, and it fell flat for me because of it. I wanted more of a lesson taught to Q. As a YA book, the messaging is forced down our throat, but Q only comes to understand it abstractly. He never actually faces any consequences for idealizing and flattening Margot in real life. And like, sure, Margot had more to her than Q had imagined, but she did like him back, and she did kiss him. The messaging was never actually shown. It was only ever and repeatedly told to us. I don't think it was delivered very well by the narrative either. I think it's really hard to have this message of like, People are not flat, they're not one-dimensional, when you have the flattest, tropiest, most one-dimensional cast of all time. And I really don't think that it succeeded in fighting against Margot as this manic pixie dream girl by trying to flesh her out in the end, because at the end of the day, she had the same purpose as any other manic pixie dream girl, which was as an aid to Q's self-actualization. I've repeated it ad nauseum at this point, but the way this book treats the women characters sucks, and I hated it, and I hated that it profited so much from doing that off of an audience of young women. It's just like so overt and so boring and tired with it. Also, this was published in 2008, so I can't necessarily judge it by today's standards, but I'm not afraid to say that I hated the repeated use of the R word in this book. And I'm sure that John Green would be embarrassed about it now, but I also think, even though it was 2008, he was a full-grown adult man when he wrote this book, and I kind of don't really forgive him for that. But despite being a full-grown man, the strongest thing about John Green as a YA writer is that he remembers what it's like to be a teenager. He remembers how it feels to be a teenager. He knows what teenagers want, and it's so clear in his writing. And it made complete and total sense to me while reading this why it gained such popularity. Yeah, maybe it did overuse the word awesome to an extreme degree. Maybe nerdtastic was said multiple times. Maybe at one point someone goes, "Oh no, you didn't." Maybe it uses the R word over and over and over again. Maybe it treats its women as the sum of Q's feelings about their bodies, and maybe it has a narrator named Quentin. But this book was written with the teenage experience in mind and with a very good memory of the teenage experience, and the entire time I was reading it, I kept thinking, oh yeah, I can totally see why I loved this book. Was it bad? No. Was it good? No. But was it exactly what it needed to be for a 14-year-old 10 years ago? Absolutely it was. I'm sure if I read more current day YA literally ever, I would have a more scathing review of this book for you, because I know there's some really good stuff being published. But at the time, I don't think you could get much better than this. Obviously, like I said, The Book Thief. But this was kind of like what we were working with. I totally understand why I loved it so much. It's not good. I will never reread another John Green book. That's another thing, is I can't really pick on what I think is probably the worst thing about this book, because I think one of the worst things about his works in general is that they're all incredibly formulaic and he tells the same story over and over and over again. And I think if I had read another one of his books, if I had read Looking for Alaska, I'm pretty sure that's the same book as this. And I would have more mean things to say, I think. But as it stands, I get it. I'm never revisiting John Green again, except maybe The Fault in Our Stars, because they're fucking at the Holocaust Museum. Okay, anyway, goodbye. Thank you for watching. I'll see you later.